there's two sides to every coin. Then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks. And some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fists at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game, gonna crack down and shut down, it's sundown. I said it's all just a game.
Okay, this one is legit. Yesterday in the conversation with Peter Maher, I said it's not out of the realm of possibility that they would win in Winnipeg. And they did. Hey, kids, welcome to Just a Game. I am me. You are you. Thanks for being here. We are broadcasting live from Treaty 7 territory. And, of course, this is an inclusive program. Everybody's welcome. Everybody is safe here. Love this show. This show is going to have a real good vibe to it. Later on, joining us in studio, Eric Duhatschek, our NHL insider from The Athletic. It's good to catch up with him. He's back up north getting set for the playoffs. Now, whether or not he's covering playoffs in this city or just up in the provincial capital remains to be seen. It's still leaning one direction. But nonetheless, we're excited to have him. And in just a moment, we'll introduce you to our first guest, who is, honestly, he was the first guy even before the show started. I said, I need a UFC expert. And he said, I'm in. So it's taken a while, but we now have a reason to actually have a UFC expert in. So, and hopefully this will lead to more appearances. But before we go there, 3-1 Calgary over the Winnipeg Jets. The Jets and Calgary are now tied. Jets have a game in hand. The math is not in favor of the local hockey heroes. They surrender the math, as it were, to the other teams that they are chasing because they have played more games. Off until Saturday when they're back in Vancouver, then home against Nashville, and then finishing off the regular season against San Jose. So if you want meaningful games down to the stretch, you've got meaningful games down to the stretch. But boy, a lot of things have to fall into place. Having said that, there was a lot of consternation and navel-gazing yesterday when, my God, he's starting Markstrom. How dare he do that? Oh, my God, he's starting the same lineup. How dare he do that? Markstrom might have played his best game of the season last night. The team played a really good road game, gave up the first goal, which is traditional, but managed to find a way to punch back. And Nikita Zadorov had a goal taken away, but managed to get that one again in the third period. This is the team you expected to see all year long. This is the team that had people suggesting that they could be a team that would go deep in a playoff run. Unfortunately, we just have not seen that team enough. Elsewhere, just to make note, the Red Deer Rebels over top of the Calgary Hitmen 6-1 last night at the Dome. Red Deer now leads this series 3-1 and a chance to close it out on Friday back at the PV Mart Center. And just for those, it's a podcast, so some of this stuff is going to be dated, but did want to make reference that the Blue Jays are underway, 3-3 going into a game today. So another big off season, that big expectations, but you didn't address the pitching. But we did address the pitching. Did you address the pitching? So far, 3-3 in 6 games. And Canada opened up the World Women's Hockey Championships with a win over Switzerland by a 4-0 score yesterday. But the game that I'm most intrigued to see will be Canada and Czechia, which is on Friday. And that's because, all due respect to Emily Clark and Natalie Spooner and all of the Rebecca Johnson and all of the Philippe Marie Poulin and the great Canadian players and the girls that do so much, Sarah Nurse, that do so much to grow the game in this country, my eyes will be squarely on Czechia, who play Japan today and Canada tomorrow. Carla McLeod from the University of Calgary Dinos led them to their first ever medal in any event internationally at the top level last September. And I want to see what she's able to do, because she is incredible. If you have never heard her speak, particularly when she talks about what she did to create culture with CJAY, it's probably one of the best hockey stories that I've heard, and there's lots of lessons tied in there. So from that regard, we're pulling for Carla to have more success. Yep, that'll do it. We can get back to the hockey in a little while. Let's do this. All of our guests are brought to you, of course, by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years. You have to go all the way back to 1946 when they opened their first doors here in Calgary. 3 current locations: McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, just off of 14th Street, and Bull Ridge Road Northwest, by McDonald's at the bottom of Windsport. But Rob, it's melting out there. It's melting out there, but in the mountains, there's still snow. So check it out. Spring skiing. There's deals on snowboards and skis and all kinds of stuff to keep you warm. Head on over, skicellarsnowboard.com. Indeed, a pleasure to introduce and welcome our UFC insider. Some of you may know him from the wildly popular morning show on CJAY 92. JD joins us. How are you, brother?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good. It's been a long time coming.
Too long.
Yes.
Excited to see the new digs. This looks awesome.
This is not bad, right?
Yeah, brother.
It's
Absolutely.
got that vibe. It's got that feeling, right?
But I tell you, there's an air of trepidation when I get called an expert or an insider in anything. I would not call myself that in the realm of
You don't think so?
anything except for Ultimate Fighting. I'd
Okay.
go, I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
I would border upon expert on a topic like this.
You would, eh?
I think so.
Okay.
Probably.
We should make mention that this has been rather big week for you. I don't want you to, put them, side by side or have to pick one. But in addition to doing this program, you also interviewed somebody from Metallica this week, right?
Rob Trujillo. Yeah, the bass player, which was insane.
Yeah.
Terrifying, exciting, so unbelievably cool. And it still baffles me how dudes that are solar systems more popular than the average guy like you and I can still find a way to just look a fellow man in the eye and have just a really normal conversation. It was really cool.
Now, they are on their way out, or they are out touring at this point?
Metallica, yeah, about to tour the entire world for like 2 full years.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, pretty well, man. They spaced it out pretty nicely. A lot of cities, they're going to do like a Friday and a Sunday and take the Saturday night off and do 2 totally different sets of openers, 2 completely different set lists.
Really?
Yeah, and they'll just hit continent after continent and just make sure the whole world gets to see Metallica.
Wow. I'm assuming up in Edmonton.
Yeah, we'll get 2 shows at Commonwealth next summer, like 2024. That's how far out that band is booking now. Is like a full year and a bit in advance.
I can't imagine that.
Very few bands that could do it. Very few bands you could look at and go, here's your next 2 years of dates.
Yeah.
You're playing all of the major continents, all the major countries, all the major cities, football stadiums when you get there. That band is enormous. It
is funny to me that I think it was 1994, my dad and I sat in Commonwealth Stadium for Voodoo Lounge with the Rolling Stones, and we both agreed that, well, this is the last time you'll ever see this. There's no bands that can do this. There's nothing coming up that will ever be able to do this. Here we are, almost 30 years later. We have the bands.
Kind of wild, isn't it?
Music just keeps going, right?
I'm okay with it. As long as these bands want to hang out, as long as they can do it at a high level, the Motley Crues, the Guns N' Roses, the Metallicas, the Stones, the U2s of the world, as long as they're willing to do it at a high level, there's a bunch of us that either will see them again or haven't had the chance to that want to.
Can Motley Crue still do it at a high level?
God, no. Okay. So much so Mick Mars saw himself out. So
yeah. And yet the Stones will still perform at 80? Yeah. Like that's where, isn't Mick bouncing up against
Mick
80?
Would be right up around 80 and can still do it. Vince Neil sounds like a coyote in a garbage compactor.
Oh, I know. There's some hard miles on there. Noted author J.D. Lewis.
Yeah.
This is also very special because I have not had the opportunity to publicly talk to you about this successful book. There it is, Cody the Roadie. You released this in the fall. We're working backwards on this. How successful was it?
We're creeping on 20 grand for the CJ Kids Fund.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, thank you, dude. Thank you.
That is amazing.
It's been so cool. I mean, that's gravy on top, if I'm being honest.
Sure.
The success of this whole thing was going to hinge upon just like making a thing, putting it out there, and getting to share it with people.
Right.
I wanted that to be the bar for success. Anything past that was great. And like I said, gravy. So like it's been cool to just put it out and share something that I made, something that is very far out of my comfort zone and what I typically do. Had never written a book before, had never written a book for kids. So not only getting to put it out, but then like take it to classrooms around the city, share it with kids and raise money for kids. That's been so cool.
I want to ask you about that part, because that's the part that intrigues me the most, is the going out and the reading to kids. And to me, you know, our industry is changed. But this is a throwback to me about how people in radio used to be part of the community, and we kind of have lost that. Now it's, no disrespect, it's Olympians that go to schools, or it's, you know, firefighters, but it was nice to see somebody from the media going back. And what was the response like? What was it like, you know, sitting in front of kids and reading your book?
So cool. I mean, I was raised in and around the library.
Yeah.
You know, we were kids that just, we always had library cards growing up. We never had video game consoles, but whatever book you wanted in the next series you were reading was always ready and available from mom and dad. So, you know, like literacy and reading was already super important to me, but then, you know, getting to take it out to schools and share it with kids, you realize a lot of schools haven't had guests post-pandemic.
No,
like there just hasn't, and it's not for a lack of interest or a lack of trying. It just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So for a lot of these kids, it's just the excitement of having somebody different to just hang out with a face, you know. But the teachers love it because they get, you know, 15 or 20 minutes to just put their feet up and catch their breath. And you know, it's been, you know, not only cool to read the book, but be able to gift it to a lot of classrooms and leave a bunch of copies there on behalf of local businesses like Spolumbos and Trolley 5, who have donated, you know, larger amounts of copies like that.
Yeah.
And then get to run a Q&A with the kids too, you know, which ranges anywhere from what's it like writing a book and questions about that whole process to what kind of vegetables does Cody the Roadie eat?
Were you prepared? Awesome. Were you prepared for those questions?
Eventually I got there. Yeah. That wasn't the kind of question I was ready for, but yeah.
Okay. So take me all the way back to the beginning. Where did the journey start?
Probably 2, maybe 3 years ago when I first started tapping on the script. It was very early in COVID, actually, like first lockdown. It had been something I'd always wondered about doing. What would it be like to write a kid's book? Why hasn't anybody written a rock and roll themed kids book? There just didn't seem to be any of that out there when I went to read to my nephews. And I thought, well, geez, but why don't I just try that? How hard could it be? The answer is harder than I thought, candidly. But I worked on that script for over a year, just tapping on it in coffee shops, in my apartment, you know, wherever it might have been. Finally got it to a space where I liked it enough that I wanted to see if anybody else thought it was cool. Seemed to pass the litmus test, and then I went about finding an illustrator because I couldn't draw.
Yeah.
So I called my buddy Shane Connery-Volk, who sings for a local rock band called One Bad Son. And he, you know, when the pandemic happened, you know, shows were off. He needed something to do, and he had started illustrating comic books. So he seemed like the perfect dude.
Yeah.
You know, a guy from the world of rock and a guy who could draw a mean picture. I gave him no artistic direction whatsoever. Just said, here's my words, draw whatever comes to mind. And he came back about 3 months later with a full book ready to go, and we got to work.
What's the key to writing a children's book as opposed to if you tried to write this as a novel or a short story?
You know, the kids sure seem to enjoy all the rhyming and the cadence to it. So I think it was making sure that flow was there, which was a completely different writing style, something I was truly not used to. So that was fun to learn. And I think just making sure that it had some kind of like an element of humor to it for sure, like a funny ending that the kids could kind of laugh around, and also maybe a little bit of a lesson that they could take away, and hopefully just take them inside of a world that they might not know. You know, it seems like a lot of people don't know what happens before or after a rock show. Yeah, you know, the roadies never get to shine, right? Like never ever. So it was cool to be able to.
Jackson Browne tried.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So like neat to be able to hopefully, you know, give the shine to a group of people who don't normally have it, and make some kids laugh along the way.
So were you have you always written? Were you always a guy that would write things? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, in various capacities for sure. Never anything like this, but I've always loved to write. 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the book, how hard was it to sell? I mean, in the sense of to a publisher, how hard was it to get it made?
So we looked at a publisher, but I like I said, I wanted to raise all this money for the kids fund. That was the number one goal. I didn't want to make a penny. Yeah. You know, the only reward I wanted was internal, candidly. So when I started going to publishers or talking to a lot of the major bookstores, they want a piece of the pie. Even when you tell them that you're not getting any of the pie, they go, well, we still want some. Yeah. So I independently published. Went to Little Rock Printing in Ramsey. They cut me an unbelievable deal once they heard that it was for kids.
Yep.
And then we just started doing pop-up shops. So whether that was, on the concourse to the Rough House, selling them there, going to Spalumbo's down in Inglewood and popping up for a couple of hours, or just taking them to concerts we were at or wherever it might have been, and just started to distribute that way.
So you're telling me that you've sold enough for $20,000 into the kids fund, the CJ 92 Kids Fund, without ever really being in the mainstream book market?
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you. It, yeah, I mean, I had to get creative, and I had to be willing to do a lot of the stuff myself and try things, like I said, I wasn't comfortable with or knew nothing about.
Yeah.
Basically turned my apartment into, the Cody the Roadie distribution center for 2 or 3 months. Did all the, because I've been selling it online too. I should mention that.
Yeah.
And all those mail outs were done out of the house.
What's the website?
CodyTheRoadie.ca.
Okay.
Yeah. Still do have, I think I got about half a box of books left. So if I can move those, we've officially sold out everything.
And that's it? That's it?
Probably. Yeah. I think so. We'll see. If there's an appetite, for sure. I've thought about a sequel too, potentially.
Have you?
Honestly, I enjoyed the process enough, and I've enjoyed sharing it even more so.
Well, you're a little bit of a rarity because in the old gig, September, October, November was book, everything was coming out for Christmas. So we always got the authors through. You always got, everybody wrote a book, and it was the same thing. Oh, you don't know how hard it is to write a book. You don't know how hard it is to get it published. So much work. It's not worth the money and all those sort of things. And I appreciate that. Like, I get it. It's Canada. It's not the United States. We don't have that mark, especially hockey books and things like that. So to hear an author, actually the only other guy that talk like you is coming in after you, which is Eric Duhatschek when he wrote King of Russia with Dave King over in Russia,
which I just read, by the way.
Oh, did you just read
about
it?
6 months ago? I read that on vacation in Mexico. That is a tremendous,
incredible book. Yeah. Like it supersedes the KHL, but it's still appropriate reading. Yeah. And I loved it because, I knew both guys, but it also really, Eric did such an amazing job of telling it through Dave's eyes. Having said that, you guys are the only two that I've ever heard that said, yeah, I enjoyed the process, which I think is kind of neat.
I think I just loved how different it was. How it was nothing like my regular job. It was nothing like preparing a radio show. It was so new. It was such a different part of my brain to exercise. I think that's where I derived so much enjoyment, so much challenge. It was a lot of fun.
Anybody, like, it seems to me we live in a world now that this would be easy to take, not easy. There would be an appetite to take it and make something visual out of it, in a moving format, movie, video, or anything like that. Any talk about that?
I would like to animate it. Yeah. Even just turn it into a short that classrooms could share. The classrooms we haven't been able to get to for a reading, whether they're too far away or we just haven't had the time. I'd love to provide that as a resource and hopefully make it an animated short at some point. Hopefully, assuming Gene Simmons doesn't steal it. I should mention that. I wound up getting a copy into the demon's hands.
I saw that
pre-Christmas. And what he told me as soon as he put his mitts on it was, wow, this is really good. Do you have a lawyer? And I go, I don't have a lawyer, but I bet you got a better one than I do. So if you're planning on stealing this, it's already yours, Gene. It's already yours.
I love it. I wonder about, Cody the Roadie land at some point. Like, if you could really blow this thing up and, books and that and video games, and then you get to the Cody the Roadie land.
Eventually we would just rebrand Callaway Park.
And that would be the natural, wouldn't it?
Callaway Park, if you're watching or listening, like, I'm open to that conversation. We can have that.
You would be happy to have
Absolutely.
that.
I'm readily available and no capital available.
What's the most interesting feedback you got on this, either from the person that gave it to you or the actual feedback, besides what is his favorite vegetables?
You know what? I at a high school, or a junior high school, I should say, in Okotoks, a couple of weeks ago. And as a part of that, got to give a talk not only on what it's like to be a broadcaster, what it's like to write a book, but also like mental health. And I tied the whole thing together with gratitude, because I'm just like, I'm so grateful for the whole thing. I really am. And this will sound real corny, but I had a kid slip me a note after the talk and after having shared the book with them, that just said on the sheet of paper, thank you for your talk today. I didn't believe in gratitude before. Yeah. And honestly, that's it right there. Like, that's what I'm most proud of. That's what I'm most willing and excited to hang my hat upon. Is stuff like that, is, just being able to share a message with kids that, like, hey, you should try something like this. You should bet on yourself a little bit. You should do the things that scare you, things you're unfamiliar with, and find copious amounts of self-love and gratitude through that.
What a great message about things that scare you. Because I talk about this often from youth sports and failure, that somehow we have demonized failure, yet failure remains to me the biggest teaching piece we have. It's taught me I am here because of failure. I have failed very well over my life, and I have learned from it. And that whole idea of trying things that intimidate you or that make you nervous, what a great message that is.
I feel like we can insulate ourselves way too often,
Yes,
right? And then
yes.
create this
Echo chamber almost.
Yeah. Well, and you create paralysis by analysis when you live in that fear, right? There's no getting out of that. That's a self-created cage, and once you start overthinking it, stop betting on yourself, stop trying things, and stop challenging yourself. Like, there's no path out of that, unfortunately. So, yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway, not just from the book writing process, but from the last couple of years of my life, is really just to challenge myself more and hopefully live a life a little less built on fear.
CodyTheRoadie.ca.
Yeah.
There are still a few left.
Got a couple.
Okay.
Got a couple.
Okay. So if somebody sees this today or shares this today, you can still get them. News that is not official. I don't believe this is written in stone, but it's still worth talking about. Ariel Halawane reporting last week that Calgary in line to get UFC 289 on June 10th.
It's the hot rumor.
It's a rumor.
Mm-hmm.
Are you comfortable with it?
I mean, I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's sure a ton of smoke now. It would be strange if there wasn't a fire to go along with it. Like,
right.
It's really starting to look that way. There's a whole bunch of rumored bouts. I think about 8 of them now floating in total.
For that card.
Yeah. 4 of which involve Canadians. So that would tell me, like, Western Canadian event, which has been a terribly kept secret, but that it sure looks like it's happening here. June 10th. And it's kind of nuts to think that well, by the time we get there, that will have been 140 UFCs ago since we had the last one here, as far as pay-per-views go anyway.
And were you at that event?
149. Yeah.
I was too.
Were you? That'll go down. I don't know how many events you've been to, but that's not just,
that's it.
That's your only event.
That's my only UFC event.
Yeah. Well, so the bar is set very, very low for your next
one.
But
it wasn't for me. It was a fascinating, because it's not me. It's not my sport.
Okay.
Pat Steinberg was kind enough at the radio station to take me with him, and he was, very much into it, and he was the guy that knew everybody. It was just fascinating because it was unlike anything else I'd ever been to. It was just a different feel. It was 19,289 people, or how many it was in that building at that night. Aren't typically at Flames games or Hitman games. They were just a different audience. That made it exciting to me. Being as close as we were, because we were sitting right ringside on the media side, just to see things. And I apologize because my mind is a little foggy, but I think we had a knockout at the time. It was the fastest ever knockout in UFC, like 7 seconds in, and it happened right in front of me. The co-main event, if I remember correctly, it reminds me a little bit, to get off topic into wrestling, of Orange Cassidy and that little thing that he does where he kicks the guy in the shins. That co-main event was they just went to work on each other's shins, and it was right in front of me. I can see why somebody a couple rows back or whatever would go, this is boring, but it was right in front of me. And I know it wasn't a very good, I know how many changes went into that. I know all of that. And I remember Tom Wright, who was the Canadian UFC representative. And I knew Tom from the CFL, so we had a chat afterwards, and he was apologizing to me. So they knew, and then Dana came out and he apologized right there, which was refreshing. You don't normally get that. I thought it was a great experience to go to, but I completely get where people, here we are, 11 years later, still connecting this possible event to that event, right? As a make good.
It'll be interesting to see how much of a make good they treat it as, I guess, because they have been back technically, right? They brought a fight night.
That's
here,
right, they did,
just before the pandemic.
Was TV, right?
It was, and it was a really high caliber one. You had Dustin Poirier in the main event. It was a big star. Jose Aldo was in the co-main, I believe it was, against Jeremy Stevens. They brought a very high caliber fight night. Those made for TV events are quite often one great fight and 13 fights. This was not that. That was a great event, and that felt like the make good. Candidly, if we hadn't gotten this pay-per-view, assuming we do get 289, I would have been okay with that, to be honest, because I thought they brought a good enough fight night. We didn't need a pay-per-view necessarily. It felt like they'd kind of righted that wrong for those of us.
Because it's not me making this up. This is one of the quotes I was taking, from the reporting around it, that it's a make good. Is that a kind of a fight perspective on this is that we remembered the pay-per-view and we know it didn't go well, so this needs to be the make good. Does the fight fan feel that way?
I think it's just hinging upon what kind of a pay-per-view we get. You know, the way they've been dressing up pay-per-views lately, they're not playing around. You're getting real bang for your buck, at least on the pay-per-view front. Right. So if they bring one of those here, like, yeah, I mean, it'll dwarf what we had with that fight night that came here, and that'll be even more of a make good in my mind, anyway. They've made it good. This is just gravy on top of it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of reestablishing back in the market because this would be the first Canadian post-COVID pay-per-view, correct?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. It'll also be interesting to see, like, not only who's available to fight on that card, but what ticket prices end up looking like, especially up here. Because like you alluded to, first Canadian event post-pandemic, like demand will be high, and they're charging crazier ticket prices than they ever have before in every other city, every other country. So I wonder what that looks like here too.
Yeah. The other craziness in all of this, and not related, and I understand, but from a venue point of view, this dilapidated, needs to be replaced dump, and I say that with so much love because I do love the building. In the span of 2.5 months, we'll play host to a UFC pay-per-view, possibly an AEW house show, which we've never seen here before, and then a WWE SmackDown event in August. It's crazy how it's kind of feast or famine right now.
I'm really surprised by that too. I'll be honest. You know, when they named the 3 potential cities, you know, maybe it was Edmonton, maybe it was Vancouver, maybe it was Calgary. I thought surely we're at the bottom of the power rankings.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, venue not honestly being the only reason. I thought maybe they'll come to Alberta because maybe it'll be easier to make an event happen here than in British Columbia. Sure, that makes sense. But surely they'll pick the sexier, shinier building 3 hours up the highway.
Right.
But somehow we get the phone call. I don't totally understand it.
I think it's CSEC being aggressive in the marketplace. I think it's CSEC. I mean, you just look at all of the, I think at one point, and I don't know this to be true, even though I worked there for 4 years, I don't know this to be exactly true. But I think for a long time you're there, and if they want to come through, they call you. But I wonder if CSEC's now playing a more active role of going out and trying to attract, because of COVID and trying to regroup all of that. But I think it doesn't hurt that whole conversation about an arena, right? Or an entertainment complex. If you have these things and you go, we are attracting right now with the Wranglers here, they become the second busiest building in Canada, I believe, just on venue, on day nights, right?
I do kind of wonder too if some of our local flavor, as far as like the UFC roster goes, has helped that case a little bit too.
Well, tell me about that, because that I wouldn't be educated on.
So, like I said, there's 8 rumored fights right now, 4 involving Canadians, and that's not even including 2 of the local dudes, Minakeem Dawodu and Chad the Monster Anheliger. Both of whom have trained out of Assassin's Creed here in town. Both have UFC fights on their record. We saw Chad fight on the Nate Diaz card against Tony Ferguson last September. Neither gentleman has fought since then. They were both on that card. So that has to factor into the decision-making process too. Yeah, I mean, they're due to fight. It would make a world of sense to have them here. And a couple of guys hailing from Calgary is just another reason to do it here.
Where do they fit in everything, though? Are they up-and-comers? Are they considered challengers? Because I don't think Dana White does things just for the sake of being cuddly and feeling friendly.
Sure. So Anheliger is an alumni of Dana White's Contender Series.
Okay.
So would be on the rise. Lost his last fight, but was on, I think, like a 10 or 11 fight heater before that. So an up-and-comer for sure, and a guy with a ton of momentum. Hakeem's been on the scene for a minute too. Fought in World Series of Fighting, and then was an acquisition for the UFC from there. This would be his, assuming he fights at 289, probably his 6th or 7th UFC fight. So, a guy that Canadian fans are familiar with, 2 of the biggest, if not the biggest, Canadian names right now.
Okay.
Well, candidly, we don't have big Canadian MMA names right now. You don't have that George St. Pierre obviously anymore. Rory McDonald's gone. Guys like that.
Yeah.
Mark Hominick no longer a thing. So it's not like it used to be where they'd roll through Toronto and you knew the 2, 3, 4 Canadians that would be on the card. It's a bit of a different animal now.
So where would these guys, if you were booking this, where would you be slotting these guys in on the card?
I mean, both action guys with heavy hands. So either guy could make for a great curtain jerk fight, like have them open the main card or have them headline your prelims, something like that. They're not opening the entire show, I don't think. I think it's somewhere middle of the pack or on that pay-per-view card. I think local flavor makes a ton of sense there.
What are, beyond them, I saw a couple of matches and it doesn't mean much to me. It would mean more to you. What are the rumored matches and where do they fit?
I mean, I think the only one with any name recognition to it, candidly, would be Stephen Wonderboy Thompson veteran of the sport, guy who's trained with Conor McGregor recently, karate stance. He's supposed to fight Michel Pereira, who's a guy who's you'd recognize his backflips in the cage and some circus antics. They're supposed to be on the card, and I'd imagine that that's probably inside your 5 main pay-per-view fights, somewhere in there. But that's a middle of the pack fight. I still don't know who headlines this thing. That to me is, as a diehard, is pretty confusing. You know, looking at it and just and looking at the roster, who's booked, who isn't, and keeping in mind their biggest tentpole event of the year is 1 month after this supposed event. I just don't know who's available, because you're saving a lot of your stars for July in Vegas. What stars do you want to spend on Canada, knowing that you can't command a pay-per-view price or an exorbitant ticket price without some big names attached to it? So who are those names?
Okay. Female fighters, or do we expect to see a number of female bouts on this one?
Yeah, I think so. There's already 2 women's bouts already rumored on that card. And I think you probably see a women's strap here. If Amanda Nunes wasn't here with the bantamweight title fight, I'd be surprised. That's one that probably makes some sense.
You wouldn't hold that till Vegas?
I mean, you definitely could. I think that's one that probably makes some sense here. She's fought in Edmonton before, so there's like a bit of provincial familiarity there. So I think she would make some sense, and she brings a lot of credence and whatnot. So yeah, she makes sense. I also think men's flyweight is another championship fight you could probably see here. Not booked. Guy named Brandon Moreno holds the strap right now. Okay. Really exciting young fighter. Probably makes some sense for a Calgary too, but you probably still need more than that. And I don't know who that is. Dustin Poirier is available, so maybe he gets the phone call. I don't know what that'll look like.
This is why you are the insider. I am the guy from the outside that watches, and the one that I had to chase down and go see was when Ronda Rousey, or when Nate Diaz fought Conor McGregor, right?
Yes.
And then Ronda Rousey was on that card. It was a spectacular card, and that's the one that motivated me to go find a bar that I could watch it at, right? So that got me out of the seat. What I'm finding right now is I don't feel like the UFC has that draw right now. Now, ebb and flow is probably the right way to put it. Where do you see the product in the history of UFC? Where are we at right now?
It's apparently, statistically, by the numbers, like white hot down in the States. So I think we have a bit of a different camera angle on it. Again, back to just not only not having Canadian fighters, but not having events up here. I think that hurts our camera angle on it a little bit. I think they've built this business model with pay-per-views and ESPN Plus down in the States and guaranteed fight nights just about every weekend now. That as saturated as the product is, they almost don't need the superstars. They don't cultivate them the same way. There's not the incentive. They've got to make sure there's fights on every Saturday night. At the same time, like, you still need big names for pay-per-views, like the one we're talking about. You still need big names for that. So, I don't think when they sold initially, right, when they sold for that $4 billion, I think when Endeavor bought them, that was about as hot as the product has ever been, right? You were at Conor McGregor at his absolute apex. Ronda Rousey had just been head kicked, the whole 9 yards. I don't know that it's as hot as it was then. I don't know you have those must-see attractions, but I think there's more on the come up, and I think a lot of those familiar faces. John Jones just showed it about a month ago, still ready, willing, and able to not only step back in, but draw big numbers and put asses in seats.
Let's talk about the theater and the young fighters coming up. I think if you look at traditional sports, basketball in Canada is probably never been better in terms of its production of players. How much of that has to do with Steve Nash's back-to-back MVPs? Well, that's 15, almost 20 years ago. It takes a while for this stuff to happen. Dana White, UFC, investing in the weekly shows and the different camps and everything. Where are the fighters coming from now? What are there new countries? Are there new styles? Or where is the young up and comers? Where are they developing?
Yeah, this really has become a global sport. It's been cool to see. Like right now, you've got just using the country of Mexico as an example. You got 3 Mexican champions right now. You go back 3-4 years, there was not only no Mexican champions, there really wasn't anybody seemingly on the horizon. So there's a sport a country rather, that grabbed the sport and ran with it and got very good at it very quickly.
Right.
I think as much as these athletes are coming from all over the world, they're now building performance institutes in all these major continents too. They put one in China. They've got one down at the Apex in Vegas. I'd be surprised if there wasn't one in Canada at some point.
Yeah.
I just think it makes a world of sense if you're looking to cultivate new talent, give them all the tools, and make it readily available for them to swing past the UFC Performance Institute and use all the gear and the coaching for free. In theory. So I think that's where a lot of the talent is coming from is all over the world, and more specifically this Dana White's Contender Series they run in the summer, which has become, a great content farm for them, but also a great way to just develop talent, put 2 prospects in the cage and essentially tell the 2 of them, winners in the UFC, losers going home.
Yeah. I feel like the old man who has to quote or go back and reference the start of this product when I asked this question, but what's the discipline? What's the major discipline now? Or are we fighting that, instead of fighters being from a jiu-jitsu background, that they're really combination athletes, that they're really taking some from grappling, some from striking? Where is the discipline in the sport now?
It's funny because like there's so few cases of a guy being, only able to be good at one practice or one discipline. It used to be that if you were unbelievably good at that one thing, you could skate by on that. And it just isn't that kind of sport anymore. But what fascinates me is you still have guys coming from all different walks of life as far as combat goes. You'll have, guys who are based in karate or sambo, guys who are primarily jujitsu athletes who have to learn striking along the way. College wrestlers still look at the UFC and go, that's still the retirement plan. Like after I'm done on the college wrestling circuit, I'll take these skills, hone them and take them there. I think wrestling still seems to be like the primary discipline, it would seem anyway, or where a lot of the kids are coming from, at least stateside. But it's still so fascinating to me that you can still have some guys who have no background save for brawling in the streets. Those dudes are still out there.
Yeah, they're out there too. What was your introduction? What was your on-ramp to the UFC?
The Ultimate Fighter, funnily enough, the reality show.
It was the reality show.
Which will make a comeback alongside Contender Series this summer, right? McGregor against Chandler as coaches, which is a great, brilliant revival of the brand and a washing of Conor's brand, to be honest with you, too. But that's a great way to recruit a brand new fan base. That's what got me in the door. It was the BJ Penn and Jens Pulver installation, which I think was the second or third incarnation of the Ultimate Fighter.
Right.
And they've gone on to have like 25, 30 seasons of that thing. It's technically
like Survivor.
Technically, it's never left TV,
that's
right? You go,
yeah.
Survivor's still on, and so is the Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my foot in the door. I remember being in broadcasting school, buying the DVDs, thinking like, let's see what this Ultimate Fighting thing is all about. And the rest is absolutely history.
And was that bad? They would end up fighting at a pay-per-view, right? The coaches
Penn and Pulver? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Be remiss if I didn't ask the Conor McGregor question. Where does he fit in all of this?
It's a great question. Yeah. And I don't know that anybody has the answer. I mean, there's a few different schools of thought. Some people would tell you that this game moves too quickly for a guy not to be training. That's a dude who spent a lot of time out of the octagon and a lot of time not training, just getting himself into gobs of trouble.
Yep.
And being a movie star, and being a celebrity. And there's that old expression, once you get used to sleeping in silk sheets, however that goes, who would want to get out of them to fight? That's super fair too. So a guy who sits on the sideline that long and then tries to make a comeback can look pretty slow and out of pace in very short order. There's other people that would tell you this is exactly the kind of adversity that a dude like Conor McGregor thrives upon, loves being counted out, has never been better than when he's painted into a weird corner and everyone says, no way, and then knocks out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, just what version of Conor not only shows up on people's TVs this summer, but then more importantly, what kind of Conor, assuming he headlines Madison Square Garden this fall, shows up in the octagon. That'll be interesting.
Do you, and maybe the people that you consume the sport with, do you need Conor in the sport, or do you tolerate Conor in the sport?
We tolerate him. Yeah. There was a time where I think we were very enamored with him as a collective. He was the dude that helped break it through.
Right.
Through to even more people. I think at this point now, it's almost just it's not a good look, candidly. I think a lot of people associate that dude with our sport, and those who, really respect the sport and the athletes that come with it and know that it's not just cavemen in affliction shirts running about causing trouble in the streets, don't really want a guy like that representing our brand. At the same time, like, I'd be foolish to tell you that guy doesn't put rear ends in seats, and isn't like a big part of the reason the UFC is now, in combination with the WWE, valued at over $20 billion.
Oh, we're getting to that. Do we still have that guys running around in affliction, human cockfighting conversation? We've moved past that.
Mercifully, by and large, I think we've seen ourselves out of that conversation.
Because that's where it started for me on the radar, and then we would do it on the radio in 2006, 2007. It's human cockfighting. You can't do that. But to me, I grew up you knew, in the 70s, you always knew the heavyweight champion. You always knew the heavyweight champion. You always knew the fastest runner, and you always knew the Kentucky Derby winner. Like, that was just it. And to me, it's I've never seen, and this is going to alienate a lot of boxers. And Steve Claggett has been so good to us, but man, boxing was such a big thing in my life, and now it just seems hard to find it, and it doesn't carry the same gravitas. Yet I look at, this conversation about Conor McGregor reminds me of the conversation about Tiger Woods. Does golf need Tiger Woods? Does the UFC need Conor McGregor? Eventually, golf moves past Tiger Woods. Nice that he's playing. He's going to be in the. Oh, great. Conor's coming back. Cool. But I don't get the sense that you are, and when I say you, I mean the royal you, are all salivating, waiting for Conor to come back and save the sport. That's just not the case.
No, I think it's an even further extension of where things were at with that first Diaz fight. There were a lot of people that were tired of Conor McGregor when he fought Nate Diaz for the first time, and that's what helped put Diaz over was the fact that he was the guy to.
He was not a nice guy.
End the run, and you're right, wasn't a nice guy at the time, And I think in some ways we're kind of back there in a weird way. I think there's a big chunk of the fan base that is turned on McGregor a little bit, and now is ready to see him out and is wondering if Michael Chandler will be that guy.
Right.
That's the brilliance of a McGregor, though, if we're being honest, right? Everybody's tuning in for one reason or the other, because, you've been with Conor the entire ride, or because you're so ready for the ride to be over,
right,
that I got to pay my $60-$70 to have my eyeballs on it when it happens.
I want to be careful about the next statement too. I'm so afraid of pissing off the fan base, because it deserves respect. And I think there was a moment in time where I thought the UFC was going to invest heavily in the world of pro wrestling, and we're going to cut promos, and now we're going to do, pull aparts, and now we're going to do, not to say that there aren't guys doing flips and, celebrating fights and stuff, but I don't think that caught on, the Brock Lesnar's and the Conor McGregor stuff. I mean, that was entertainment, and it was really from the wrestling standpoint. That didn't catch, did it? It's not. It didn't become a thing, right?
It didn't seem to. No, that attitude era kind of approach to things, right? I think mixed martial arts fans want that to an extent, but not to the point where it feels cheesy in any regard.
And it got cheesy for a bit.
Yeah, man. I think when you mentioned Brock Lesnar, the first instance that comes to mind is him coming into the cage to challenge Daniel Cormier a couple of years ago, and I think that was a point where we all went, I was okay with Brock Lesnar being cage side, like that's cool. But the minute he comes in and picks a pretend fight with DC, that's the minute it's a bit too wrestling for me and my ilk, I think.
Yeah. Let's talk about it. This past Monday became official. Endeavor and the WWE merge, a $21.8 billion merger. This has to be taken very seriously on a lot of levels. What does it mean to a UFC fan, this merger?
I'm interested to see what our sport can learn from theirs, candidly. I think it'll be interesting to see what the UFC can derive from the WWE business model, and just what that looks like from a fan experience standpoint. I think that's something that Ultimate Fighting has tried to cultivate, which is almost like that. I don't know if cult is the right word, but that cult-like fascination and following that pro wrestling is able to command. I think they've got that lightning in a bottle, and the UFC has it at times, but would like to have it more regularly. Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's a great way for those two brands to work together. Obviously, if I were a wrestling fan, I would wonder what that means for my roster. Because for the UFC roster, it's been interesting to watch with deeper pockets running the company about how it's really become about the bottom line, and that hasn't worked in the fighters' favor.
No,
but there's been no point of unionization or anything like that. The fighters haven't banded together, and I would wonder what that means for the wrestlers.
Those are two very similar conversations that have been had about Vince McMahon and Dana White, right? That the outspoken veteran will always go to how they're treated, the money that all of that sort of thing. But the history of wrestling, they just could never organize, right? And I think you're going to see more guys get cut loose. I think they're going to be lean. I think they're going to rely on some of the built-in HR and travel things that they can combine. The biggest one to me is broadcast. I'm really curious to see if they become the hothouse for broadcast innovation, because there are some similarities. They can get cameras into rings or need to be by rings and things like that. I'm very curious to see what what comes out of it in the next couple of years in terms of how we view these sports.
I also wonder, for a TV deal, what that looks like too, right? Because the UFC's got one more year with ESPN stateside.
Right.
WWE has 2 years left on their deal, but now you're able to take these two enormous properties and, in theory, take it to a Netflix, an Amazon, whoever it might be that wants in on the live sports game, and go, man,
or do you try it again on your own?
That's interesting.
Or do you try it again on your own?
I mean, you'd have the assets, right? And
you got the WWE, you got the inventory, right? Which you do with the UFC too, but the inventory goes beyond just the one legacy. It's, other wrestling promotions and things like that. And then, you could become also a provider for others.
Because one thing for sure, if you're the UFC or the WWE, is both of these fan bases have shown like they're very willing to pay a subscription fee. They're willing to pay regularly for pay-per-views and events, and they want that content. If you will build them a library, they will come.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you take these two gigantic libraries, fuse them together, and then charge whatever you want? You're right. You may not even need a Netflix. You might not need any help with
I think you have to look at it whether or not you could develop that technology yourself, right? Almost like BAM, like when Major League Baseball invested in their own technology, and I thought that was a brilliant move on their part, and it was, because they spun it off and sold it and all those sort of things. I can't help but think that wouldn't be one of the plays here, is at least to investigate that.
I'll be curious to see what it means from an advertising standpoint too. On the WWE side of things, you would watch more wrestling than I would. I don't know how prevalent, advertising is, like on the,
it is now.
Yeah,
it is now. And that's a technology thing, right? Because they've been able to put the LED boards around the ring and things like that. So you have in the last couple of shows started to see, Mountain Dew or Cheetos or whatever, or the movies or whatever, which, again, that was, I remember, like, that could have been the quickest argument I ever heard. My God, they're putting advertising on the mat, and what? And it's become a part of it, right?
Honestly, at this point, like the octagon canvas looks like you could just remove it and then drape it over top of a NASCAR.
That's exactly
it's got that many advertisements on it, and now
nobody pushes back.
No, nobody does. In fact, at this point, they've doubled down. I don't know if you saw it yesterday, but now for about $1,400, I think is what they're charging for it. You can, as a fan, have your name put on the octagon in microscopic print, and they'll charge you for it.
I'm sorry, for how much?
$1,400. And then not only do you get your name on the octagon, which you can't see on the broadcast, it'll be way too friggin' small for that. Then you get that tiny piece of the octagon in a frame mailed to you. And they'll do.
See, that's the brilliance of it. That is absolutely the brilliance of it.
Because that guy's out there. He's out there.
You don't think, and you don't do it for every wrestling show, but if you did that at WrestleMania or something like that, that would be huge in the collector world.
Sell the whole canvas millimeter by millimeter and print money while you're doing it.
Oh my God.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is brilliant. The other part that I wonder about is things like clothing deals. Because we remember the big argument, actually, I'm wearing a Reebok, right? And the whole Reebok debacle, if you want to call it that. But now you have these two entities that sell a lot of merch, and can produce a lot of merch. You wonder about the Fanatics deal, because I believe both are under Fanatics, are they not?
I believe so.
Yeah. I mean, there's some real interesting synergy.
It really is. Yeah. Venom is the in-cage provider for the UFC now.
Yeah.
And, that was a super lucrative deal for them coming off of the Reebok deal. And yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder, where that can go and what kind of money that can make, not only for those manufacturers, but when they're charging $60-$70 a t-shirt at a live event now, like everybody except us is making copious amounts of money.
Do you have any sense of what age group enters into fandom for UFC? I mean, is it a teenage sport? Because that's the one thing I do wonder a little bit about, is if you recently the WWE made a lot of noise about going to PG-14 or whatever that is, M14, whatever. They wanted a little bit, more racy content. I just wonder if you don't dumb it right back down into big giant characters like Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy, so that you can kind of own that 6-year-old market all the way up.
Yeah, I wonder if that's maybe almost the next step for them. I think right now their ideal target fan is a guy with a lot of disposable income, and I only base that upon what it costs to be a true diehard. Right. One that's paying for all the content. That he's streaming, the guy that's buying all of the t-shirts, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a guy with a lot of money to be spending on stuff like that. But then when I look at the fighters that do cut through right now, the guys that are on the cusp or on the come up. It's the guys that are great at streaming. It's the guys that are great on social media. And that to me would skew at least a little bit younger. Like the people that are consuming content like that and interacting with athletes that way would be leaning a little bit younger. So I think you're right. I think the bigger you can make the personalities, the younger, in theory, you could skew the entire product.
The last one, and it's almost the first thing that came out of the merger, was co-branded weekends. Do you see that working? Could you have a WrestleMania weekend tied into a big UFC weekend and just take over a town?
It's interesting because these big sports events so often tiptoe around one another, right? The UFC won't even put an event on Super Bowl weekend anymore. It's just there's no sense in trying to compete with that. This past weekend, UFC didn't have an event because WrestleMania, right? And I wonder if you run the risk, especially when Mania now is a 2-night event, right? Like where exactly is there room for more UFC viewing there? How much eyeball time can you really expect to get from the average person, even if they are your P1, your absolute diehard? I don't know. I really don't know. I also don't know if there's enough crossover there. Like
absolutely.
I don't know if I want in on the wrestling game as bad as I want to watch mixed martial arts, and vice versa. Like I don't know that the average wrestling fan is going, look, man, Mania is already 2 nights. You want me to give you a 3rd night of my time and my money for Ultimate Fighting? Cool idea, but I'd rather watch it next week.
And I think that was one of the misnomers from some in the the non-sports related media, is they said, oh, well, it's the same. It's not the same fans. It isn't. And that's part of the brilliance of it. Yeah. Is they brought 2 large fan bases into one group now.
And man, if that Venn diagram can exist at all, right? Any crossover that exists, copious amounts of money to be made from the guy who wants to watch both of your enormous products.
Yeah. Well, and who knows if and when UFC 289 on June 10th gets announced and made official, I wonder if we're going to see any kind of hint of that relationship at that event.
Well, that'll be the other thing, right? Is how do you cross promote? Like I'm sure like there's no brainer ways of just plugging the next big WWE pay-per-view on a UFC pay-per-view. That's the easy stuff. It's, what wrestlers are you procuring to have cage side at a UFC event? What presence do you have there you mesh the fan expos together and start doing big get-togethers like that? I wonder.
Well, could it be the intros? Could it be something as simple as, do you set up your venue more like a WWE venue and allow, because it was really cool. 289, I can't remember. It was at least one wrestler that came out to Bret Hart's theme song, but they snake through the crowd, as opposed to that giant stage where they come out and they have those incredible. I wonder if that's an adaptation that they might borrow.
Well, I mean, that's something the UFC's gotten away from, and I think it's something the fan base clamors for. We want more personality. Honestly, that's what sells. There's a precedent for it. Early mixed martial arts, and in the early 2000s in Japan, that there was all kinds of pomp and circumstance, pyro, entrance songs, whatever it might be. That's the part of pro wrestling, I think, that is just the biggest no-brainer to take and plug into mixed martial arts,
even if it's just the big events.
Let these guys have signature songs that they walk out to, right? There's a bit of that, like 149 here in Calgary. I remember Uriah Faber came out to California Love by Tupac, and the whole place went off. There ought to be more of that. There ought to be more goofy moments where Israel Adesanya comes out dressed as the Undertaker. That shouldn't be a one-off. That should be the kind of stuff that's happening on every major pay-per-view.
As long as we're not going to see Uncle Howdy and Bray Wyatt on UFC shows. They can stay in wrestling. I love them, but I don't need the supernatural crap.
Do we want Brock Lesnar back in the UFC?
No. How old is he? Like
there's fun to be had. Yeah, but it's heavyweight MMA. You can fight until you're 80.
I guess. I don't know. Do you? You tell me.
It's interesting. I mean, that was one of the first conversations. What wrestlers would want to fight and what fighters would want to wrestle.
It's not always a good mix, though.
It isn't, right? To just assume that that's going to work.
No, Brock was different. Brock was, that wrestler that they groomed right out.
Yeah.
But, you look at CM Punk and what a big deal that was, and how poorly that ended.
The nice thing is now, if there's anybody on the WWE roster that has those CM Punk curiosities, now it's a whole lot easier to scratch them now.
Oh yeah,
same company.
Sure,
Come on over.
Come on over.
See how it goes.
Give it a shot.
Spoiler: it won't go well.
No, it won't. All right. Before I let you go, Rough House. How are things going over there?
So good.
Is it
so fun?
Yeah.
We had 17,500 people for St. Paddy's Day. which was, I mean, just so much fun. Panther City in town this weekend. 2 regular
Which is a
season,
possible playoff matchup?
potentially. Yeah. Playoffs clinch now and hoping for a home playoff date. And boy, the boys look good. You know, for a season, we weren't sure what the team was going to look like. They've been great. A lot of fun to watch.
No, I mean, the last 2 years, you watched Dane Dobie and Curtis Dixon walk away, and those were supposed to be killer blows. And, you know, Bordy's done a really good job, and Mouse has done a really good job. They just keep finding a way. Now, I would think they're a little more defensive structured than they were with those guys, but it's working. And I mean, the guy between the pipes, is there anybody better in the league right now?
Nobody better than Christian Del Bianco. Nobody.
Right?
Nobody.
No. And he's, speaking of personality, he's got a big personality too, right?
They're you know, somebody ought to do more to capture some of those personalities. I don't know who that guy is.
I just, my criticism is stop presenting the game like minor league hockey and start giving lacrosse its own perspective and broadcast.
There are incredible stories there, just like waiting to be told. Big personalities that are just waiting for a spotlight.
Absolutely, 100%. Speaking of big personalities and spotlight, CJAY 92 presents Dungeon Wrestling tomorrow. You going to be there?
Actually, I'm up in Red Deer for Easter festivities, so I will not be there.
Okay, well, I'll take care of the. Will Jesse be there?
Oh, yeah. In fact, if you could do me a solid, because I won't be there to do it, if you could throw Jesse a clothesline, a tombstone pile driver,
whatever you would need.
Just a quick stunner even on your way in or your way out.
Absolutely. Happy to. Really, you were there the last go around, and we just started the show, and I came away, and I was just so blown away. It was so much fun. It felt like old time small town wrestling. It felt like the pavilion was loud and full, and they, I know Brett's got a hand in the booking, but they gave you a really good match off the get-go, which I thought just set that crowd on fire. And that is as much fun as I've had in an evening in a long time. They put on a great show.
That 6-man tag match was a roar too, right before the intermission. And you're right, that room is perfect. Not just because of the history, but honestly, just the way it's put together is just perfect for that kind of event. Yeah. It's so cool to hear, Jesse was telling me he walked through with Brett shortly before the first event they had in there. Yeah. And Brett was pointing at spots where he used to, hang out and watch as a kid, when he was about yay tall. So just like the rich history in the pavilion, there's no better spot in town for it.
I don't know if you can find a more diverse cross-section of fans at an event in the city.
Yeah.
Because there was lots, to that point about, there was lots of people pointing out to grandsons or kids, that's where I used to watch, or that's, I sat there and that sort of thing. And it's the most unpretentious, it's back in time. You could shoot a movie about the 50s in there, right? Without having to do a single thing to it. It was absolutely and they put on a good show. Like they really put on a good show.
I love how generational wrestling is. I wasn't raised a wrestling kid at all. Yeah. I don't have that childhood affinity to it.
That was Jesse though. Right?
It was big time. Yeah. So it's neat for me to see not only him, passing that along that love of wrestling and live events, and also watching televised ones to his kids, but also to go to an event like that. And like you said, like see all these different generations, all these different walks of life coming back, because at the end of the day, like everybody loves live wrestling. Everybody.
Yeah, I know. It's fantastic. So get out and check that out. What else you got going on? It seems like a lot. A book. You're obviously in the UFC Insider. You've got the Rough House, and then you've got there's the rest. There's the show.
Yeah, the morning radio program too. Yeah,
going. How do you guys avoid the trap that seems to gobble up the rest of radio? Because you guys are still what I would consider a traditional morning show. What I grew up with, kind of, lots of stuff going on, the right kind of, but also you own the town, like you prop the town. Everything else just feels like it's been too many fingers on it, right? Too many consultants, too many, we had a research study and, you got to say this more. You guys just feel like it's Jerry. It feels like Jerry's show is just continuing.
Thank you for saying that. That means a lot, and he's the guy who deserves the biggest, tip of the cap in all of it. The trail that he blazed, in having all that fun for all of those years and being so community focused.
Yeah.
And just driven by community. A lot of people ask me, what did you learn from Forbes? What did he teach you? He taught me a lot of stuff, good and bad habits, to be honest.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing was always just to make sure people are feeling good and having fun, and to be helping people whenever and wherever possible. And I think those, we have very, very simple filters for this radio show. It's just making sure everybody has as much fun as we're having in the room every single morning.
Yeah.
And making sure we're as involved in the community as possible. That's it. I don't know that we have a secret sauce outside of that. And we're very good friends. Like we have a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun working with Forbes, and I've had a lot of fun over my radio career, but I don't know that I've ever had as much fun as I'm having right now, honestly.
Which it comes across, right?
Thank you.
You can't fake that.
Thank you.
I'm not taking knocks at other people. It's just the business has changed so much that you remind me of what I say about certain broadcasters in hockey that thank God they got in when they did, because they wouldn't be allowed to do it now. If you were coming into the business, you would not be allowed to do it that way.
I think that quite often, actually. I'll be honest,
right?
Over the course of any given morning, I go, I don't know that this is the way we're supposed to be doing it, but I think we've been doing it this way for long enough. No one's going to correct us. So
CodyTheRoadie.ca. There's still a couple more books. Give them a tap on the shoulder. Oh, look at this. There, you can't see it. There's Gene Simmons, whose second line to you was, "Do you have a lawyer?" I think that's fantastic.
So good. Yeah, CodyTheRoadie.ca, if you'd be so kind as to buy a copy. All the proceeds to the CJ Kids Fund, and that lets us just do some incredible, really important work here in the city.
You are such a good dude. Thank you for doing this.
Brother, thank you for having me. Literally anytime. Thank you.
All right, pal. There you go. JD Lewis, he is our UFC insider. Once we confirm UFC 289, we will let you know. Of course, brought to you by, as all guests are, the Ski Sellers Snowboard, skisellersnowboard.com, 76 years. 3 locations: McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, just off of 14th Street, Bow Ridge Road Northwest, by McDonald's, just by the Windsport there. You'll find it. And not just, hey, listen, it's not just skis and snowboards. No, it's warm equipment. And keep you, as you go out into the hinterland here, even in the spring, you can always use a good deal, right? In just a couple of moments, our NHL insider, Eric Duhatschek, will join us live in the Oodle Noodle studio. How often can you say that? You're live in the Oodle Noodle studio. Butter chicken, mac and cheese, kung pao noodles, Bangkok pad thai, classic vegetarian and gluten-friendly options. 2 locations in and around Calgary: 1244 17th Avenue Southwest, 105 Main Street North in Airdrie. Pickup and delivery. A reminder, this is Thursday, not Friday. I don't know if I need to remind everybody, but somebody's going to go, well, hold on. Wait, why is this show on Thursday? That's because tomorrow is the Easter weekend. So we are back on our regular schedule next week. Looking forward to our Wednesday show in particular, as Billy Jaffe from Nesson will join us. We'll talk to him about particularly the eastern side of the National Hockey League. And in studio, we are expecting goaltender extraordinaire Marco Carducci. Marco Carducci will be joining us next week. As we continue to roll along, one number, and I might actually bring this up when Eric joins us, the one number that jumped off the page at me, not number, it was a stat. And there's not a lot I like about Sportsnet anymore. I'm just grumpy. But if you're following anybody or anything from them on social media, follow their SN Stats Twitter account, because there's some great stuff that they throw out there. January 18th, the Winnipeg Jets, first overall in the Western Conference. January 18th, first overall in the Western Conference. And here we are, April 6th, and they are technically tied with the Calgary Flames for the second and final wild card spot. However, they have the tiebreaker there, but that's a fall from grace. That is the opposite of the story we tell about the 2018 St. Louis Blues. That is not the same story we tell. And what else was I going to remind you? The Roughnecks are playing this weekend. And, yes, Calgary Hitmen. If you are so inclined, if wrestling's not your thing, you're not coming to the pavilion tomorrow, you might want to go up to Red Deer and cheer real loud, because the Calgary Hitmen could use you. Falling last night by a 6-1 score, without their captain right now, without some of their best players. It's a long road to hoe. They're down to the Red Deer Rebels by a 3-1 score. I think that's pretty much where everybody was kind of figuring this whole thing would end up. Having said that, it is junior hockey, and who knows what will happen. We go back from guest to guest. I love it. And we bring in yet another insider, NHL insider. Of course, our guest brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary, 3 locations, McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, just off of 14th Street, Bow Ridge Road Northwest, by McDonald's at the bottom of Winsport, and skicellarsnowboard.com. And here's one of the most awkward, clunky segues ever. Our next guest came to Calgary to cover skiing, I believe, to write about skiing. Did you not, Eric Duhatschek?
That is correct. Yes. 1978.
Okay, not 1946. That's them. They've been around for a while. And here you are. Welcome home.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's nice to be back. And I was thinking, I haven't been out skiing yet this year. And
still time.
Conditions look pretty good. And I'm going to have to wrap my head around the fact that I want to drive into winter. But no, you're right. In 1978, I had just graduated from journalism school. I was a summer student at the Toronto Star, but looking for a full-time job. And they had a hiring freeze on. And the Calgary Albertan, long live the Calgary Albertan, Lynn Watson was the sports editor at the time. And I've told you this story before, but maybe not on the air, that, he called me, like I'm a Toronto kid, right? Yep. So he said, how do you feel about skiing? I said, well, my parents emigrated from Austria. We have done a fair bit of skiing in our lives. And he says, good, because I need a ski writer. All my guys want to cover curling. Now, again, as a Toronto guy, I thought he was making a joke. So I did the obligatory, and then there was like 5 seconds of dead air. And I thought, I may have made a mistake here. Well, of course, once I've been in Calgary 45 years, I soon learned that curling is a very serious enterprise here.
Yes.
But I also realized that why they needed a ski reporter was because you did have to get out to the mountain. And in those days, it wasn't like it is today. You had to stand at the bottom of the hill with your notepad, no tape recorders, no cell phones, jotting down notes, interviewing people in the cold. Your pens are freezing. Yet you ended up, one of the first things I learned was bring a pencil, because a pencil wouldn't freeze.
Right.
Now, a pencil tip could break. But anyway, it was just a different time. And I really enjoyed it. I honestly tell people all the time that those first 2 years, while I was making nickels and dimes, were 2 of the most enjoyable years that I ever had. Because that was the heyday of the Crazy Canucks.
Yep.
I got to know Ken Reid quite well. We're only 3 weeks apart in age, so we have a lot of shared background. And it was Ken Reid's prowess on the World Cup circuit that got me assigned to cover the Olympics in Lake Placid in 1980. So as the junior man on any staff is not going to be assigned a plum assignment like that, but Reid was a favorite in the downhill. And because the Albertan was a small publication that could only send 1 reporter, they said, we're sending you, but then you're also going to have to cover the men's Olympic hockey team and figure skater Brian Pokar. So I traveled with that 79-80 Olympic team, which had Glenn Anderson on it, Jimmy Nill, Paul McLean, Tim Waters, Randy Gregg. It was a really good team. And I actually saw the Americans that won the gold medal in 1980 play 7 times before the Olympics. And I checked with a lot of my American colleagues, and most of them had only ever seen them play once or twice, and some not at all before they got to Lake Placid. In fact, if you watch the movie Miracle, there's a scene where Herb Brooks is feuding with reporters all the time. Well, I was one of them. Herbie was really mad at me one time because I wrote a kind of a critical game story, not just of the Americans, but of the Canadians, because there was a brawl at the corral during the series they had here. I think it was the game where Bob Suter broke his leg and had to be carried off the ice. So anyway, the skiing gig at the very beginning of my career got me into the hockey gig. And then, after the Olympics in 1980, which was, an incredible event to cover as a 24-year-old kid, the Flames arrived 9 months later, and, I've been covering the NHL ever since.
Rest of the city's history.
Yeah.
Okay. There's 3 things. As a ski reporter, you just covered races and results, but you wouldn't travel, right? You would just go to the mountains here.
In the beginning, but I did go to Whistler in 1979.
Okay.
That was supposed to be the first World Cup race not in Europe. Right?
Okay.
So that was right around the era where, before Canada had hosted any World Cup races, and Ken Reid was a big part of promoting that, along with I think it was Serge Lang, who was running the International Ski Federation at the time. And I did go out and cover the race in Whistler, but it ultimately was canceled because because of a lack of snow. It was right at the end of the year.
Gotcha.
And so you talk about great assignments. For 4 days, I think the Whistler skied every day, and there was no event to cover. So I ended up writing nothing but postponements, which was not great for the newspaper,
Right.
but for the kid that was out there skiing on somebody else's dime, it was pretty great. So, but the other thing is just to complete the thought, there was also a what's the word for it? A promotional side to the thing, because every Tuesday the Calgary Albertan, and I believe the Herald did the same thing, had a ski page, because there were a lot of all of the resorts and plus the ski seller, all of the manufacturers, they all advertised in the newspaper in those days, and there had to be content that would support those ads. So you would also spend part of your week writing that. So there were events to cover. I guess the honest to God truth is probably the promotional stories were most important for the business plan of the newspaper. Those were the things that they cared the most about. But they were always fun to write too. And I got interested in equipment because of that. I remember in those days, the downhill racers, there was a period of time where they had these little notches in the tips of the skis, and it was to create a better,
airflow,
aerodynamics to it. And I remember asking Ken Reed about that. I said, it looks, crazy. And he said, well, they've tested it in the early versions of wind tunnels, and you pick up a 10th here and a 10th there. And I soon realized that in that sport, if you can pick up a 10th here and a 10th there, that's the difference between being on the podium and being 6th, right? So
Olympic hockey teams brawled.
They did in that particular one. There was
that wasn't common though.
No,
Okay,
exactly.
Okay.
And that was if I remember, I wish I had it in front of me, but if I remember, that was the premise of the piece. This is that was a couple of years after the Broad Street Bullies. So the NHL game was as rough and tumble as it's ever been at that stage. And the whole idea of international hockey was supposed to be a purer version of it. And the American players were all college players, and a lot of the Canadian players have been recruited from the U.S. college system. But it just goes to show, Rob, that rivalries can elicit real emotion, and those teams didn't really like each other. That was one of the really unfortunate things about that competition, because those teams played some great games against each other. People in Calgary had a chance to see 3 of them. I think I saw one in Hibbing and Fargo at the University of North Dakota campus there. Again, as a young kid, getting a chance to go to these different venues was
absolutely
fascinating and really illuminating. But there was some really, really fun hockey played by those teams. And then they never met in the Olympics because the Canadian team was eliminated before that crossover thing. Again, the format of the Olympics in those days, there was no actual playoff. The 2 top teams from each pool advanced. You didn't play the team from your own pool again. You just crossed over and played the other 2 teams. And at the end of it, it was whoever had the best record. And that's why the Americans, after they beat the Russians on that Friday afternoon, still had to go back on the Sunday and beat Finland.
I don't know if people realize how many people realize.
Lots of people have forgotten that. Everyone thinks that the miracle on ice took place on the Friday, which it did, because that's Al Michaels. Do you believe in miracles? But if they had not been able to defeat Finland on the final Sunday, Russia could have still slid in and got the gold. Yeah. So
what a crazy story.
Well, and it was partly because of that that ultimately, the Olympic format and the World Championship format were changed. They used to just be, points in the standings, and you got to a situation like you did in the Calgary Olympics in 1988, where Russia had won the gold medal before the final game and put up a half-hearted effort in that final game, lost, and it affected the final medal standing. So I think at that point, the International Ice Hockey Federation realized that they needed to adopt more of a single elimination format, and I think that's what hockey fans like too.
Yeah. The third thing,
okay. It's amazing that you can remember the third thing, because I would have, if I had said there are 3 things, I would have forgotten the second and third thing instantly.
The first thing, I thought, for some reason, I thought you were going to tell me that you had to go measure the snow for the snow report.
Oh,
no. Okay.
No,
so you didn't have to do that.
No, I didn't do snow report. Other people did. Snow reports were a big deal.
They
as
were
well,
a big deal,
especially
right?
on radio. I mean,
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
that.
And in the in the newspaper, it'd be part of the sports
Sure,
column,
yeah.
right?
I did not have to do
Okay,
that.
that's
Thankfully,
good.
that would have involved getting up early, right?
Right. Well, exactly. The brawl at the corral involving 2 Olympic teams. The third is tell me about Herb Brooks. And the reason I asked that question is I don't know what to think. I know people who played for him at the NHL level, and he was not popular. And we both know coaches that aren't popular but are successful. What was Herb Brooks like to cover? What was he like to be around?
Well, so it was, for me, it was a different experience in 1980, covering what he would consider the team, that the opposing team, very brusque and difficult to deal with. Well, what happened was, so after that column ran, he wouldn't talk to me. So what he used to do was he'd send Craig Patrick out. Craig Patrick was the assistant coach. Craig Patrick became a very influential person in the National Hockey League.
No kidding.
And I got to know Craig Patrick because he was the guy that was coming. And again, we were traveling. The Herald wasn't. So a lot of times there'd be one reporter at these things, and it was
you,
this guy. and Herbie wouldn't talk to me. So it would be Craig that would come out, and he was never a great interview. But when you start to develop a relationship with someone that early on, it helps.
Sure.
He eventually ended up running the Rangers and hired Herb to coach the team. But what I will tell you though is that our relationship changed and evolved, and at the end, we were well acquainted, and there was no issues at all. Like I think after a while we'd just both been at it for a long period of time, and I don't know, I mean, it was a different era in those days,
yes.
Rob, because I mean, to do this job, you have to have a certain backbone, right? And there's some people in the industry like and respect that, and some people in the industry don't want that. They want to steamroll you. And so if you put your hand up and say no, or write something that's critical, and of course in those days too, it's not like today where a lot of things are done remotely. If you wrote a critical story on player X or coach Y, the next morning you were down at the practice so that they could let you have it. I mean, it was just a different era. So you developed the thick skin, and that was just part of the job. But I'll never. The other thing that I remember most about Herb was, so he had this great career, and then he came back and he coached the American team in Salt Lake City. And if you recall, the Americans had a really great round robin, and they were the hometown team. They were favored to win. Canada had a very circuitous route to the final.
Calling out people.
Right? Yeah. And and then Belarus upsets Sweden, and now the Canadians don't have to play Sweden in the semis, and then they get to the final and they beat the Americans in a very dramatic fashion. So one of the great stories of my life, Canada. I was writing for the Globe and Mail in those days, so writing for the national newspaper. It's been 50 years since Canada won a gold medal. You're in Salt Lake City, 90 seconds to go, and spontaneously people start singing the Canadian national anthem. Very, very cool. Afterwards, Wayne Gretzky reveals the tale of the loonie. As a writer, you raise your hand and say, "Okay, thank you very much.
Ding, ding, ding. We've got a winner.
We can work with that." So the next day, or I think it was even 2 days later, because it was so difficult to get out of there, we're leaving Salt Lake City. The airport is jammed. Security is really tight, because this is soon after 9/11, right? Yeah. So it was a difficult Olympics to cover on that level, because security was so ramped up. There was just a fear of terrorist attacks. Everybody was on pins and needles throughout the whole competition. So imagine two long security lines, and everybody has to go through them, whether you're the coach of the American team or just a writer covering it. So Al Strachan and I are in the left line, and Herb Brooks is over there in the right line, and he sees it and he waves, and he comes over to our line, and he's upset because of that story that had made the rounds about the American women stomping on the Canadian flag, and he was so upset.
Oh, really?
He was so upset. So he came over and he said, "Our girls would never do that. That's just false." And so we thought, we were sort of, great tournament, Herbie, great swan sign, everything else. And that was the one thing that was on his mind. And it was just, and I had to believe, like that that it had to be true because he was so worked up about it. And he's like a lot of people after about 5 minutes that the steam engine slows down and away you go. But I was struck by this. So Strack and I are there, and Herbie's over there, and that was what was on his mind the day after this really heartbreaking loss for the Americans, and
that's where his head went.
Salt Lake. Yeah. So I mean, I had a great admiration for him. He was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame. I was on the selection committee when he was elected. He was an interesting character, and I thought there's been several movies made. I remember the Carl Malden one didn't really ring true.
Okay.
The other one,
Miracle,
with Kurt Russell, was closer to my perception of what went on there. But having said that, I wasn't in the rinks with Team USA in Europe when he was doing those skating drills. But he was a hard man. Yeah, he was a hard man. And the other thing, I guess, is that when Bob Johnson came here to coach in 1982, and he became the first American to to coach in Canada, and that kind of paved the way for Herb Brooks to get into the NHL. They were longtime college rivals and really didn't like each other.
Oh, really?
Oh, they
aren't the same person.
Really didn't like each other. And someone told me at the time that the only time they ever saw the two of them smile at the same time was at Mark Johnson's wedding. Really? That Herbie was invited, and so they, now whether that continued, but in the beginning there was that rivalry from the U.S. college ranks spilled over into the NHL. And you're right, their personalities were completely different. Herb had one approach, which most people saw in the movie, and Bob Johnson was the opposite. I mean, the way Bob Johnson coached then, you see a lot of that now, right? The player, the so-called players coach, he was
way ahead of
his time. Yeah, exactly. But it was anomalous for the NHL at the time, and it took some of the players a long time to adjust to that voice and that approach, because most of them had come through the system, junior hockey. It was tough, and now you're in the NHL. So all of a sudden you have this Mr. Positive, and like a lot of, I think in the beginning there was a certain amount of suspicion. Was it being put on?
Yeah.
As you got to know Bob Johnson, you realized that was just the fabric of the man. That's just who he was.
Right.
He didn't have an artificial bone in his body. He would show up in the morning, and everybody would be dead tired, and he'd be, it's a great day. I mean, that was literally true. That whole "it's a great day for hockey," that I must have heard it 100 times out of his mouth on days when it didn't feel like a great day for hockey. It didn't feel like a great day for an early flight. It didn't feel like a great day for anything. And he's in there pepping everybody up. It was quite an extraordinary couple of years traveling with him and covering Bob Johnson, for sure.
This is why you're the first guy I called when I said I'm coming back on the show.
Just to tell the old stories?
No, but I was going to ask you about Kurt Russell, and you got there. Yeah. Because there's not a lot of hockey movies where we can go, well, I knew him, right?
Yeah.
So you're able, Carl Malden, great actor, wrong guy.
Yeah.
Daryl Sutter becomes the coach with the most games behind the bench, passing Bob Johnson yesterday.
Yeah.
Peter Marr and I were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
We got to Bob Johnson through Herb Brooks.
Yeah.
Now you can tell one of my favorite stories.
Okay, which one is that?
The losing streak and
the
Bob calling you and Shaky in.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it was just the usual post game. So, yes. So in 1986, the year that eventually the Flames made it to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time, they had one of the longest losing streaks in team history. It ended up being 11 games. The 11th game was a nightmarish loss to the Hartford Whalers. Yep. I remember Dean Evison had a really strong game that day. David Babbage had a strong game. They lit up Reggie Lemelin, and the quotes from the Hartford dressing room was just a whole lot of sympathy for Lemelin, because he played so well for them for so many years. And again, in those days, you interviewed the coach in his office after the game. So, now you have the banners and so on and so forth, scrums, in-house media. It's crowded and it's very formulaic. But in those days, you you walk in and Bob's behind the desk, stands up, and George and I are on the other side of the desk, and we're the only two writers in there. And I want to say, before we even had a chance to ask a question, or we were starting to mumble something about, like, is this the bottom, or the generic question that you might ask in that situation, he just goes off on too much is being made of our so-called slump, and that just stopped George and I in our tracks, because they'd lost, like, it was a horrible loss. They had lost 11 in a row or whatever it was, and they were just sinking fast. I mean, they were having a really good season up until the middle of December, and all of a sudden now it's the middle of January, and nobody can put 2 feet in front of each other anymore. And so it was, as I say, we were paralyzed, because what else can you say? And it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just rereading, George Johnson did a book, The 100 Things You Need to Know About the Flames, and that was one of the 100 things, and I was just rereading his account of it, and it jibed completely with my memory of it too. There are certain things, like, so much blurs in 45 years, but some things just stand out as if it happened yesterday. And I can still hear him saying that. And we were practically on the floor. I don't think we were laughing, but we were just, I mean, I can't think of another way of putting it. We were paralyzed, because this was just the ultimate example of Bob trying to spin a negative into a positive. And actually, that was the last game they lost. They won the next game, I believe, 5-4. They'd called up Mike Vernon, and they got back on their feet. Yeah. And then the next thing you know that your friend Perry Berezan scores the
greatest goal in Flames history.
The greatest goal in Flames history, and they're in the Stanley Cup final with Vernon against Patrick Waugh talking to his goalpost. Again, pretty remarkable season to cover, for sure.
But as someone who never met or covered Bob Johnson, it goes back to what you said about the fabric of that story. I believe to be the man. Yeah. Like, there was no pretense. He wasn't, we get yelled at by coaches all the time, or you guys are making a mountain out of a molehill. Yeah. He truly believed.
Oh, yeah.
They were not in a slump.
He thought we were exaggerating. Well, and I will say this, that they lost 5 in a row before Christmas, and then they went on the Christmas break, and they were really unlucky. Like, some of those losses were really unlucky. Yeah. They shouldn't have lost, but they did. A bad goal, a bad break, goalie standing on his head. So they're at 5 losses in a row, and not really playing all that badly. But then the next 6 games, they really started playing badly. So
they played to the level.
When all was said and done, it added up to no points in the standings for close to a month. Well, that can undermine you.
Yeah.
And again, a different time, I think in a 32-team NHL, if you went a month without getting a point, that would probably eliminate you from the playoffs. But you did have the opportunity in the 21-team NHL to recover, because 16 made the playoffs.
Yeah. To Darryl, in the 401 games, tip of the hat. It's always something when you are the leader in franchise history. Should we talk more about the franchise history? That a team that's been around for 40 plus years, the most games that a coach has ever coached behind the bench is 401 and counting? Isn't that a little off?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at the profession of coaching. So there's the one way of looking at it is it's the hired to be fired profession, and there's been a lot of that here. And then there's been other situations like Nashville coming into the league and turn of the century, and it was basically Barry Trotz there for a while, and Peter Laviolette, now John Hines. So, a lot of stability, no championships. Came close a few times, had some President's Trophy winning teams and some very good teams, but never got over the top. So I would say that there's no one right or wrong way. And think so. A week and a half ago, I was in Anaheim and had an opportunity to speak at length with Jared Bednar, and for a story that I'll publish in The Athletic at some point before the playoffs about the challenges of defending. And one of the things that came up in the conversation was, his first year behind the bench was one of the worst seasons in modern NHL history, 48 points. And he was hired at the 11th hour, and he was kind of an unknown. We knew him because of his
ties here,
being an assistant in Abbotsford, and he had won in the AHL with Cleveland the year before. So he had and he was one of those people that I really admire, because I like I admire the success stories of someone that touches every rung on the ladder up there. So think about, his playing career, 4 junior teams over a 3-year period, and then, all those years in minor pro, and then, 11 years of apprenticing he did not take,
he did not take the express.
Well, he didn't take the elevator.
No,
to the
he
top.
sure did not.
He touched every rung on the ladder. And then his first opportunity, the team has 48 points and it's just a disaster. So, good for Joe Sakic, the manager there, trusting in his original decision, realizing that that was one of those years where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and stuck with him. And, I think it was, it was only a few days after I talked to him that he'd signed that contract extension, and he's going to be making millions of dollars for a number of years going forward. So I do think that having faith in your decision, did we hire the right guy? And if it doesn't work out right away, do we want to push him to the exit, or do we want to give him another opportunity? And I think that, what Colorado did with Jared Bednar should be a lesson for lots of teams, that sometimes you don't take the expedient path, but you take what you think is the right path and stick with someone and let them find themselves at the NHL level. And by the way, you can also help them by getting them better players.
Well, that's a huge part. And how I would illustrate that is when Jay Feaster brought Bob Hartley on, a young John Cooper was kind of, in the weeds and would be hired eventually by Tampa. And I think he just celebrated 10 years as the head coach of the Tampa Bay Lightning, right?
Yeah. He's had a pretty good run there too.
He's not bad. Yeah.
But,
but again, surrounded by the right players.
Sure. And when you think about it, like John Cooper was the second young coach that they hired there.
Yep.
And the first one didn't really work out. Right. So, I think that's, it is an inexact science, and you don't know how a coach's message is going to resonate, and then you don't know how long it will resonate, because eventually, even for the best coaches, it runs out, and then you have to make a change. But yeah, there's just so many different ways of going about coaching. So back to your original thing, like it is important that that you set a franchise record for for coaching. And now in Darryl's case, it was over like two
different stints.
Exactly. Yeah. So that might,
it's a little odd.
Well, or it changes it a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
that's that. Can you go home again? Well, I guess you can.
It's been an interesting week for the local hockey heroes,
to say the least.
I said it off the top today. Last night was the team that I thought we were going to see. The goalie played like the goalie we thought we were going to see.
Yeah.
It also, we did a show yesterday where we were talking about that Chicago game and just baffled by it all. I mean, they do not hold that. They don't control their own destiny now.
No.
That's something they've given up.
Yeah.
I just don't even know where to start anymore.
Yeah, and I'm glad you that's your starting point, because I don't know where to take it from here, to be honest with you, because it's the same thing. There was a part of me, because this has been such an upside down year. I said to somebody, I said, here's what will happen. They'll lose to Chicago, they'll beat Winnipeg. And because that's been
the year.
That's the year. Exactly. Yeah. So the game you should win, you lose. The game, you're traveling, they're waiting for you. They have as much on the line as you do. They can put you away, and they find a way of winning that game, and they find a way of losing the other game. So again, we're in the analysis business. So we're trying to come up with good, logical, rational explanations for why things have unfolded the way they have this year. And I'm like you, I'm baffled. I really don't know. Now, I would say this, a lot of times when a team has a year like that, and Winnipeg's had a couple of months like that too.
Yes, they have.
When you think about where they were, I mean, they were the top team in the conference for a period
January
of time
18th.
right there. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now they're on the cusp of missing the playoffs. So how did it go off the rails so badly? In the days when I was actually covering a team, traveling with the team, in the dressing room with the team, you could pick up on the nuances, and I'm not that anymore with the Flames. So I've got that arm's length view of it, and it does look like there were times when the message of the coach was just being completely tuned out, and I also think that the onus is on the way that the game is and the way that's governed by a salary cap, the onus is on your highest paid players to produce at a level commensurate with their salary. And I don't think, I think any reasonable hockey fan will look at the way Jonathan Huberdeau has played, the way Nazem Kadri has played, and they haven't done that. And even someone like Elias Lindholm just seems like a different player this year. I mean, he still has the great defensive chops, but when
he scored 40 last year,
when he had the puck in the slot last year, it was in the net. He's got the puck in the slot this year, he's missing the net. And it's not, he hasn't performed at the level that he did a year ago. And yes, he doesn't have Matthew Tkachuk and he doesn't have Johnny Gaudreau. Obviously, those are factors. And but I think too that last year when that line got going, it just exuded confidence every night out. I mean, everybody has a handful of off nights over the course of a season, but they didn't have very many. Like they were really, a lot of people last year said that's the best line in hockey, and it would be hard to dispute that. There would be like analytics to support it, and the eye test would support it.
Absolutely.
So, and he was a critical piece. He was the center on that line. He was a critical piece. So, the level that he was at last year, he hasn't been at, and it almost feels like they've, like thank goodness for Tyler Toffoli. I'm not sure.
And Michael Backlund.
Yeah, and Backlund has been fantastic. But if you go back to the trade that they made for Toffoli last year to give up a first-round pick, and I remember Brad Treliving saying at the time that one of the things that we like about this, not a rental, he's a guy with term at a reasonable term, and a guy that has a history with Darryl Sutter, and so there won't be that adjustment period, because sometimes it is difficult for players that have played for, say, a John Cooper type or a Paul Maurice type to adjust to Darryl's style, which is more along the lines of what Mike Keenan used to coach, or Scotty Bowman. And but with Toffoli, knowing what he was getting, they felt that there was a very there wasn't much of a risk there, and that has proven to be a true assessment. Like that has been one of the better trades that has been made here in a number of years. He's come in and been everything they hoped he'd be, and a little bit more.
What about Winnipeg? I mean, here we are talking about Calgary. In a way, Calgary's underachieved. Did Winnipeg overachieve in the first part of the season?
I don't know. That's a really good question, because Winnipeg has puzzled me for the longest period of time, ever since that year that they got to the Final Four and then lost to Vegas, and then Vegas lost to Washington in the Stanley Cup final. I've always felt that they've had a team on paper that should be competitive every year, and they've been up and down.
Good goalie.
So you have a guy that's perennially in the conversation for the Vezina. Obviously, when they had to move away from the Dustin Byfugliens and the Ben Chiarot's and the Tyler Byers, when those guys were in their primes, and it was really just Josh Morrissey that was left there, that the blue line was thin for a while. But I think that they've reinforced that by bringing in the Pionsks and the Nate Schmitz and the DeMellos. So I think their blue line is more than adequate. And when their position players are all healthy, on paper, they have one of the strongest 1 to 9 groups of forwards in the National Hockey League. So and 2 years ago they weren't very good, and then for the first half of this year they were, and a lot of it was the coaching change and breath of fresh air with Rick Bowness coming in, and Paul Maurice had left us a little high and dry. That was what the players were saying, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out. So that just looks to me like a team that doesn't respond to the moment particularly well. And then all of a sudden they played a couple of games where they looked like the team that they needed to be. They just had 2 outstanding efforts. And then last night, just okay. So I think that there's a fragility to that team. But I also think that they're kind of sneaky dangerous, because if they get into the playoffs, they could be one of those teams that says, okay, I know Blake Wheeler's not the captain anymore, but I think that he is a big believer in that, us against the world thing. And I think that's the drum that they will beat if they get into the playoffs. No one believes in us except us, the players in the dressing room, and let's go out and show them. And if you play with, essentially a pressure-free environment. You just look at the teams at the bottom of the standings right now, that, with the young kids coming in, and all of a sudden, Chicago's winning games that they're not supposed to, and then San Jose is winning games they're not supposed to, and Arizona has won way more games than they were supposed to. Yeah. And so, there's no question in my mind that that playing, like a light and carefree brand of hockey just frees everybody up to play their games.
Sure.
And the opposite of that is when you're feeling that pressure, it weighs on you. There's a heaviness, and when you have that heaviness on you, it slows you down. And all of a sudden, on the nights when the Flames haven't looked very good, they look slow, right? And I think that's just the heaviness of expectations that's weighing on them a little bit. So, I often think about, and I've said this a couple of times. In fact, I brought it up with Daryl Sutter when I saw him in California a couple of weeks ago, that people have forgotten that in 2012, when the Kings won the Stanley Cup, they made it as the 8th seed. They were touch and go to make the playoffs, but they ultimately made it by, I think, 5 points. I looked it up today.
Were they down to San Jose in the first round too?
That was in
year.
2014.
Okay.
So the year that they won in 2014, they were on the ropes and they had one of those miracle comebacks.
Right.
But the 2012 was the year that once they made the playoffs, they only lost a handful of games. The rest of the way, they were the 8th seed. Vancouver was the top seed. They went in and just rolled over Vancouver, and then they nobody really gave them a run that year. They went from being a team that was an 8th seed, or the second wild card, if that's the terminology you prefer, and they rolled over everybody.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people say, well, teams are built for playoffs. LA was that kind of hard, heavy team, but I think about the year that Nashville made it to the Stanley Cup final. They were an 8th seed, and they took out Chicago in the first round. Columbus was an 8th seed and took out Tampa Bay that one year. Yep. Colorado was an 8th seed in 2019 and took out, in Cale Makar's first year, took out Calgary. So, on paper, it makes no sense. I'm sitting there trying to think, okay, how can you, like how is Florida going to beat Boston? Well, here's the thing, Boston's had this amazing year. Last year they were a wild card, and Florida was the top seed. So this year their roles are going to be practically reversed. Yep. Florida will, I think they're going to make it, and if they do, but they'll make it as a wild card that just barely creeps into the playoffs. And Boston has been, almost coasting this last little while. I think Taylor Hall is coming back soon. Mm-hmm. They're resting David Krejci. Most of the dispatches from Boston are, so-and-so could play tonight if it was a playoff game, but, why run the risk? Right. Well, we've seen that happen in Calgary before, where a team that has, clinched early took the foot off the pedal and could never get back. It couldn't get back up to 60 again after that. So I mean, that's what makes the playoffs the intriguing animal that they are. That even if you just go back the last 5 or 6 years, somebody somewhere is doing something they're not supposed to. The year of the Canadian division, Montreal and Winnipeg were clearly the inferior teams, and they both won, and
Winnipeg swept, didn't they?
And then Montreal was in the Stanley Cup final. As they were fourth in the division.
Yeah.
And so this is why I don't gamble, because I wouldn't have the I couldn't handle it. Because everything is so logical and it points in one obvious direction, and yet 2 weeks later it's like, really, Boston eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we said about Tampa. And the year that they faced Columbus in the first round, they had one of the greatest regular seasons in history, and they were out in 9 days.
Yep.
So anything can happen, which I guess is why we watch.
Was Tuesday the last time Jonathan Toews will play in Calgary?
Yeah.
Is this the end?
Well, I think, publicly he's saying that he wants to mull over his decision in the summer. And I think that's wise and prudent. It's been another difficult year for him. He missed that entire year because of long COVID, and then he came back and, for a while was playing at a reasonable level, not to the level that he once was at, but still, a contributing player. And then, all of a sudden he had another setback. And so, I think he wants to, I think he wants to, and he deserves the ability to just sort of look inside himself and say, do I still have the motivation? Because the one thing that I will tell you that in the abstract, every NHL player will say is that, when they're approaching that career crossroads and they're considering retirement, it's not even so much the games in October that matter, because they all still love playing the games and they're ready to play the games and they get the adrenaline going for the games. It's those intermediate steps you have to take in the summer away from the spotlight, where you're up in the morning and you're in the gym and you're working out and you're getting yourself into the condition that you need to be in, even just to get to training camp. And then you have the training camp and then you have the season. And that's where the motivation disappears. It's July, and the golf course is beckoning, and you've got the new tailor-made driver is in your bag, and the trainer wants you in there, doing the medicine ball workout, and that's honestly, that's a lot of times when the decision is made. No, I'm trying out that new driver. So we'll see. If you're asking me to guess, I think this probably is the end for him. It would be different if he hadn't won 3 championships in 6 years. He's won Olympic gold medal. I mean, there's nothing really left for him to prove professionally, and then it's just a matter of and I think he's that's the other thing about Jonathan Toews. He's a pretty well-rounded guy, right? Has a lot of diverse interests. A lot of times people keep playing because they have no interest other than hockey, and so if they don't have the game, they have to find something to do in the game.
Where do they go?
Whether it be in broadcasting, coaching, scouting, there's lots of other jobs affiliated with the game. But I suspect that he'll be somebody that he's interested in green initiatives. That he's a complex, interesting guy who is probably readier than a lot of people for the next stage of his life.
I was asking Peter Maher about this because I'm fascinated by what people view as his legacy, and maybe it's only because it's so rock solid for me. I know he won Stanley Cups, I know he won Olympic medal, but man, when he and Kane came to town, that franchise blossomed, and it became, because what it was like before that. I mean, 2,000 fans on a weekend, no home games on TV, and all that. Now they're not ultimately responsible for those things, but they were the face of that team that came back. Like, I think his legacy is almost making the Blackhawks relevant in Chicago again.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't think a legacy has to be a single thing.
No, that's true. Fair enough.
And so I think that there will be a number of things, like when he gives his Hall of Fame speech, I think that he will touch on all those things, or certainly the people talking about him will touch on all those things. But that's an important one to discuss, I think, because we all know what he did on those Stanley Cup teams. We all know what he did in the Olympics. He was such a catalyst on that Olympic team. When you have the best of the best in Canada, and then he is still one of the elite players in that group, that tells you something about his contributions. But you're right. And again, so I was working at the Globe and Mail at the time, and I was one of the very early people that went in there before people knew who John McDonough was or Jay Blunk. I remember sitting in his office, people there tape recording every conversation to make sure that you get the quotes right. He was an interesting character, John McDonough, but it was to do one of those revival of the Blackhawks stories. And because he was, he was from Chicago, but he was working for the baseball team, the Cubs at the time. And so, he would be trying to give me the history of it. And it's like, okay, I was there at the Chicago Stadium, and I was, and I know what it was. And I was also there in the early days of the United Center, and I knew what a mausoleum it had become. So you don't have to fill me in on the details. I saw it at its peak, and I saw it, where it just fell off the face of the earth. And I think that was one of the things that was kind of like a crying shame for the National Hockey League. You only have the original six teams, and the legacy of the other 5 were still great. Even, Detroit, when they were suffering as the Dead Things and the Gray Wings, it was still not as bad as Chicago at the very bottom. And I do think, and plus, they tried that rebuild several different times, right? So they tried
Calder and Bell.
Sure, the ABC line, Tyler Arneson, Mark Bell, and Kyle Calder. They were supposed to be the building blocks, and that just, it didn't work out. And then they had to start over again. So really, the Kane Taves part was the rebuild within the rebuild, or the rebuild after the rebuild, which is really hard to do. To go back to square one twice in a very short period of time, that's organizationally, you better get it right. And they did, because those 2 guys were everything that they they hoped that they would be, and more. And then I think the other thing is that there was a dynamic between the two of them. They didn't always play together 5-on-5, but whenever Joel Quenneville needed a goal, he would put them out there 5-on-5. They were dynamic on the power play. They had different personalities. Kane was that carefree guy, and Taves was Captain Serious. And it was just like the yin and yang of those two guys together. Though people always talk about chemistry, and that's the thing that you cannot forecast. You grab Kane first overall, you get Taves third overall. You don't know whether these guys are going to work out together or clash. You don't know.
Yeah.
And it did. It worked out perfectly. And so that to me is always one of the real tests of team building, and not only that, like the randomness of it, the idea that, if Taves went third overall, what if, he had gone first overall instead of Eric Johnson, could have changed the entire dynamic of two organizations, really. And I've been thinking a little bit about that, because most of us are going to be writing a lot more about Connor Bedard in the next.
I don't know why.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
That you saw the goal. It looked like Mario Lemieux against the Minnesota North Stars, didn't it?
Which one? Okay.
So a couple games ago, he split physically split the two defensemen.
You know what? So I've seen him. Like it's great, because the networks are running highlights of all of their playoff games, and every night there's another one, right? So that's why I was a little bit like, which one are you talking about?
Yeah, that's true.
There's a lot to choose from there. So, but it was interesting, because. I was watching the TNT broadcast a couple or 3 weeks ago, and this point has been made by a lot of people in the past, but I thought Henrik Lundqvist made it in a very compelling way, which is that, it's one thing, to draft a player like that, but immediately you need to surround him with the right people, because the one way of really getting it wrong is to not have the kind of correct veteran leadership in the dressing room. And so then you look at the various teams that are in contention. Columbus is in contention, Chicago's in contention, Anaheim's in contention, San Jose's in contention. Do they have the right supporting group? And if they don't, the onus will be on the respective general managers to go out and get those players. And the only thing I would tell you is that in some of those markets, it's not that difficult to recruit players to. But if you have Connor Bedard as your shiny bauble, here's Connor Bedard, come and join us and be part of what we're building here. That will be very attractive to players who hit free agency this summer. So, if you're San Jose and you get Connor Bedard, I think all of a sudden, it will be a lot easier for Mike Grier to go out and sign,
for sure,
or bring in the right kind of players. And then some teams have them already in place. Last year I thought a lot of. There was, if he hadn't been hurt, probably Anaheim would have traded Adam Henrique, who I think is a really good leader, and I've known him since his New Jersey days. Probably if they don't get Bedard, they might trade him in the summer. But if they do get Bedard, then you've already got a piece there. You've got Henrique, and you want a couple more guys like that. So drafting Connor Bedard for one team is going to be like a complete home run, and that will also, I think, open the door to just make it easier to get the right kind of players to surround him with. And so, that's the fast track to success as far as I'm concerned.
If Chicago gets him, would that influence Taves maybe? Would you want it? Would you want to stick around to groom him?
Well, put it this way: if you're the
that could be a legacy piece too.
If you're the general manager in Chicago and Jonathan Taves is thinking about it, what you're saying right now is, well, first of all, they're still playing, right?
Right, absolutely.
So take your time.
Yep.
We'll know on May the 8th.
Yep.
Who wins the draft lottery? We'll know by then. So then, as Jonathan Taves makes his decision this summer, one of the things that he'll have to factor is, Connor Bedard is coming in, and you need to find that energy, right? You need to find that passion again, and possibly having a player of his ilk, like a young, maybe the next Connor McDavid or whatever, that could be just the tipping point in terms of getting someone who's listing towards retirement to think, maybe another year or two. Because you're right, Jonathan Taves is the perfect guy in terms of setting a standard for a young player coming in. Absolutely. And I would guess that if Chicago does get Connor Bedard, one of the first orders of business will be, Jonathan, come on back, come on back. So
You know my love of obscure stories, not necessarily obscure stories, but stories that nobody else is talking about.
Okay. What do we got?
Comes from The Athletic.
Uh-huh.
We're staying in Chicago.
Uh-huh.
The Chicago Wolves
Mm-hmm.
are going to go all independent next year in the
Yeah.
American Hockey League. First time since 94, 95.
Yeah, I saw that.
The old IHL would have had independent teams too. I don't know what to make of this. It just seemed like the whole minor league system had run its course, and now the AHL was there to serve the NHL.
Right.
And yet, I read the quotes from Wendell Young, who's been there for a long time. They won last year. They beat Stockton.
Yeah.
But they don't want to lose.
Yeah.
So now they're going to go independent.
Yeah.
Is that crazy? Is that weird? Is that?
I don't know. I don't know if it's crazy or weird. I do think that there are an awful lot of players who are great AHL players who never get a chance at the National Hockey League level. And so
we got one here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matt Phillips, right?
Yeah. And so I think probably every AHL team has somebody like that, or a couple that are like that. And so think about it. If you're the Chicago Wolves and if you're a player, 25, 26, 27, you know that your best hope is like an NHL cup of coffee. And so you have an opportunity to live in Chicago, play with other players that are like you. So it's probably going to be an extreme winning environment. I think they'll beat up on the league.
I do too. Yeah, I do.
Because, everybody else is going to be in that development mode, and you have to be, right? The whole idea of having a minor league team is to make sure that every year you can feed, one or two, Walker Durs or Jacob Pelches into your lineup, because that's the only way of sustaining any kind of consistency in the National Hockey League. So but if if you're not going to be that guy, like, if you're in that next group of forwards that's just kind of there to ride shotgun for these young guys that are being groomed to play in the National Hockey League, and the option is to go and play in a great city for a team that's probably going to win lots. I see nothing but incredible success for them.
Do they have a salary cap in the American Hockey League?
Not that I'm aware of, but
I know they have rules in terms of the amount of players you can have with experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, there will be ways of navigating around.
Are they going to spend more on players than Arizona? That's what I'm asking.
No. Actual players or contracts that are on the book.
Actual players.
Okay, actual players. Well, it could be close. I mean, that's the crazy thing about Arizona's payroll is that it is inflated by having all of these contracts on it that are mirages, right? They have a salary cap number that doesn't even reflect what the actual compensation is. The salary cap number is 5.5. The compensation in the final year of the contract is $1 million. And then, and in the case of a number of them, the contracts are insured, so you're not really on the hook for very much. So yeah, there is a salary cap game being played in the National Hockey League. And I'm just not familiar enough with the mechanics of the AHL to be able to tell you one way or another. I do think there are rules, but I think that those rules are still give them the opportunity to attract the best, 25 to 28-year-old players in the league, pay, a competitive salary and just create an attractive work environment for them.
I might be the only person that is thinking this way, but I wonder if Hershey and some of these other traditional American Hockey League franchises that were, for a long time, they were mostly independent with 6 or 7 affiliated players. I wonder if they follow suit.
That's a good point. Well, what I will tell you is that hockey at every level it tends to be copycat. So if one organization has success doing that, then others presumably will follow suit.
Welcome to the Oodle Noodle studio.
Oh yeah, nice here. Yeah.
You like this?
Yes. I was impressed. By the way, though, you gave me one bit of bad information.
What?
No street parking to speak of.
Nothing.
Well,
those guys with all those guys with the free vehicles in the show before me, they all left before you got here.
Well, put it this way: it's a beautiful day, and that 12-minute walk didn't really.
Oh
bother
my
me.
gosh! Okay,
if I can only remember where I parked, because it's way over there. But the rest of it is great.
Thank you. Thank you. And of course, we can read you in The Athletic. I just a shout out, and normally I shout out your stuff. I just want to shout out Fluto's column yesterday on Hallmark on the 2 inches. Have you had a chance to read that?
No.
Oh, I love that kind of,
Yeah.
Gets in the weeds with Bob Essenza
Yeah.
and talks about, here's a guy that was like 38th in save percentage
Yeah.
and now is going to win the Vezina
Right.
2 inches.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. That's what you get out of the Athletic.
Okay.
You get the 99 and that kind of writing out of the Athletic.
Yeah. Well, and then the one thing I would tell you is that even as someone that works there, we have 40 plus hockey writers producing a lot of copy, and it's difficult for me to read everything
No kidding.
written by my colleagues.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there. So yeah, I guess this is my turn for a shameless promotion. If you care about the game, and especially if you care about the minutiae of the game, we have quite a bit of really interesting stuff out there, and some young people that I really admire. Like Shayna Goldman and Dom Lusician are, I've been working with them on various trade boards and different projects the last couple of years, and I've really come to appreciate how smart they are, and they're mathematical geniuses. We have these skull sessions, and they could teach math at university.
Sure.
I was a good math student.
I'm not.
I was a good math student, but they're phenomenal. So yeah. Anyway, enough of that.
We told you we got a general manager for the Halifax Killer Seals. That's Trent McClellan. Did you get any feedback on your 6? I'll call them on the 6 possible expansion locations.
Oh yeah. That was. That was.
I know it's a couple of weeks ago, but
yeah. Well, it was. It was by far the most read story that I've written this year, by far. Like,
really?
Oh, off the top, yeah. And I believe it sold the most subscriptions of everything I read. Yeah. No, it touched a nerve. It touched nerves everywhere. So
I love it.
So yes, I got quite a bit of reaction to it. In fact, I think somebody at the can you do versions of that more regularly? And it's like, I'd like to. I'd like to be able to.
Yeah.
I don't think you can go down that well too often, but no, it popped.
You get
it popped, as we like to say.
You get to the point. Well, we're talking about Weyburn and Banff this week. I don't know if there's possible expansion. I don't think it works.
That won't work.
No. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for
Okay.
coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Eric Duhatschek, everybody from The Athletic, of course, brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary, 3 locations, McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, just off of 14th Street, Bow Ridge Road Northwest by McDonald's, just down the hill from Winsport. And hey, hockey players, check out their snow skating. That's all I'm going to say. Go in and ask them about snow skating. The final mile today, just a couple of things. 5 years. This is a really a tragic day. 5 years ago, the accident in Humboldt with the junior A team, it forever changed the hockey world. It remains and has a long-lasting impact. What we can talk about is that some of the things that it spawned out of that from great tragedy, people made positives. I think of the Boulay effect and Green Shirt Day, and I think of even Ryan Stradzniski from around here, who continues to push forward and now has set the goal of making our para sled team, and all of the recognition that we continue to give to these players and the broadcaster and the trainer and the coach, Darcy Hogan. Hard to believe. I think for most of us, we know where we were when we found out. I know for a lot of us, it was, it felt so right in the pit of your stomach, just kind of sickening about having to put a stick out, not having to put a stick out, but putting a stick out. But that was all we could do at the time. How the country rallied around it, how it really struck a nerve in the hockey world. I don't know. I hope it's made positive change. I think it has. I won't speak on safety and highway safety and things like that. I know there was a lot of conversations about those. I can't speak to that. I know bus travel was reevaluated for all junior hockey teams and for all teams that travel. It became more important. Bus safety became more important. You take that stuff seriously, as we should, but just recognizing that it was 5 years ago today, and we will never forget. And last, I do want to end the week, and it is the end of the week. We'll be back with you next week on a rather positive story. We talked last week with Michael Blaze. He's a wrestler, originally from Calgary. He's up in Edmonton right now, but he is on May 13th is going to wrestle for 8 straight hours. He is on the card at the Pavilion. We were talking about that earlier with JD. Dungeon Wrestling has a great card at the Pavilion. There's still a few tickets available, but I want to thank Steve Lambros and the rest of Dungeon Wrestling who reached out and made a tremendous, generous offer and are inviting almost 40 plus heroes and superheroes, kids and their families, to Dungeon Wrestling tomorrow. An opportunity that particularly the heroes kids would never get. So we really appreciate that. It just reeks of Calgary. It reeks of the hearts. It reeks of community, and the fact that they did that really means a lot to many of us. So thanks to them. Fun week. Look forward to next week. We're with you on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday next week. We are hoping to have Marco Carducci in studio on Wednesday. Another conversation I've been looking forward to having for a long, long time. None of this show happens without some great producers, and right now I'm really being propped up by three of the best. Thanks to Gavin, thanks to Mark, and thanks to Jack this week for doing an outstanding job. Remember, this is a podcast, so if you're just catching us for the first time, please leave a recommendation, the stars, all of those sort of things, and more importantly, tell your friends, and go back and listen to some of the programs we've had. I mentioned Michael Richard Blaze, which was an awesome conversation last week. Kelsey Snow was on the program recently, even yesterday. Both Peter Marr, and then we had Grace Dayfo and Alicia Rissling. Got a lot of feedback on Alicia and Grace, and a lot of people appreciated that. So we're trying to stay true. This is a Calgary show about sports, and we want to take a little time and get into the details where we can. Have a great weekend. Make sure if you're celebrating that it is everything you need it to be. Take care of each other, and we will see you on Monday. Thanks, everybody.
When there's two sides to every coin, then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks, and some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fists at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, Cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game, gonna crack down and shut down. Sundown. I said it's all just a game.